good morning. Welcome to our program, Struggles of the Spirit. I'm your host and interviewer, the Reverend Leland Udell, and we're delighted you turned into the program today. We're continuing our series of looking at ministry, different kinds of ministry, lay ministry or ordained ministry, whether the person involved is a Jew or a rabbi, a priest or minister, a lay person, no matter what the role. We're examining lay ministry and ordained ministry and looking at differences and similarities. And today we have a special guest. We have Sheara Billado, who is with us, someone that I have known for a number of years, and we decided as we talked about the program not to start out cluing you in as to what her vocational work is. We're going to let it flow, and you will discover about that. But we decided to do it that way because we want to emphasize ministry and what ministry means for her, and not to have someone automatically characterize what the ministry is because of how she earns her living. So Sheara, I welcome you to the program, and I guess, as I said, I'd like you to begin talking about what ministry means to you, and then to go into chronology, when you first were practicing ministry.
Thank you, Lee. Should I start at the beginning, or should I start at the beginning?
Well, try to define ministry as you see it now.
Okay. Well, I think I'll do it just the opposite, actually, if you don't mind.
That's perfectly okay.
When I was a child, my view of ministry was that of the ordained minister. I think it was most child's view of ministry. And what I did for God, I did on Sundays while I was at church. And sometimes when I said my prayers at night. And that was my relationship with God.
What you did at your prayers at the bedside,
That's
and then
right.
what you did on Sunday at church.
That's correct. And I didn't think of it as ministry, certainly. It was just where my relationship with God was.
Okay.
I didn't extend it beyond that. I didn't extend it into my everyday life. And I sort of went along like that until I was in college. And at that time, I was really into science. And the scientific part of me said, prove it. And I stopped believing in God. And for 20 some odd years, I was really quite a happy atheist, quite content.
You really were?
I really was.
Okay.
I really was. Not seeking for anything, not feeling the need to search, or I was very happy. My view of people who believed in God was that they were needy people, probably not very intelligent. It was a very arrogant view. Probably not very intelligent, and needing a crutch. So I was very happy.
May I ask you a question about
Sure.
the happy atheist? Not necessarily just about you, but sometimes, you know, the word atheist is a dirty word, and it's helpful for us to look at it not in that sense, but to try to understand it better. An atheist, then, at least as you understood it, didn't worry about whether anything has an eternal meaning or value or purpose. Everything was transient and
here and now.
And here and now, and the fact that at the grave, what is it? Whoever's it might be at the grave, it really had no bearing. The person's dead. That's the end of it.
That's the end of it.
Next, let's go on.
Exactly.
Really?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I, you know, I can look back in a minute, but then through a patient of mine, oops, I just divulged what
That's all right. Sooner or later you were going to say something.
I'm a nurse practitioner, pediatric nurse practitioner, and a patient of mine was a vehicle for my conversion, not in a way that I could even tell it was happening, interestingly enough, or maybe it wouldn't have happened. But in the way he led his life, and in through his dying, I suddenly found myself knocked off my horse, so to speak, and not real happy about it.
What was so special about the way he was living and finally dying?
Yeah.
What was it that made you,
he was well,
sit up and
it goes
take
back
notice?
to some of my original feelings about people who believed in God. He was a very intelligent young man.
How old was
he was 21 when I first met him. He was deeply religious, but in a way that was a lived religious experience. God was very much part of his life. He talked about college and dating and sports and God, all in the same kind of conversation. I found it very puzzling because we were good friends. I was his caretaker, and I admired him. He lived with a joy that I had never seen before, this immense joy, even as he was knowing that he was dying. And I would walk in his room and he'd be reading the Bible, and I'd be embarrassed. I'd think, he's reading the Bible, this doesn't compute,
He's a young man, why should he read the Bible?
But in my role with him, of course, I support whatever someone's
Sure. He could be doing origami,
That's right. And so I supported him and listened to him when he talked about his God, and then in his dying, I found myself extraordinarily angry one night at his God, very angry, and ranted and raved to a good friend. And at the end of it, I thought to myself and said to her, "Isn't it strange that I can be so angry at a God I don't believe in?" And it was sort of like a whack, and it was like not something that I had thought about or planned. And in fact, I even said, "Oh no, there go my Sundays." Little did I know. But so then the things that I had previously attributed to people, I had this wonder about the goodness of people and the ability of people to love and the just the goodness that's inherent in people that I had always seen, even as an atheist. My sense of what the source was changed.
Okay.
And so...
It wasn't just the quality of their personality, it was something more.
Exactly. And I found myself bringing my patients in prayer to God, and I would say to God, "Oh, this child is really hurting," or "This family is in such pain," or "Please, God, be present with this family. Let them feel your arms around them. Let them feel your love. It will make all the difference in their life."
How did you move from being so angry with God about his death to asking God?
I didn't do any of it. God did it all, and I was a somewhat unwilling participant. And then I was so encompassed by the absolute unconditional love of God that it wasn't a choice. It overwhelmed me. It became my inner core. And I remember one time when I was in prayer, I would visualize bringing this child or this family to God, or having God present, because I knew that presence in my life was everything, and I knew that what a comfort that would be to these people. And one day God said to me, "Okay, go ahead." And I sort of went,
"Go ahead, what?"
When I was saying to God, "Please be present to these people, please put your arms around them, please let them know how much you love them, that they're safe," God said, "Go ahead." And I think that's the first time I really realized that God was asking me to do something. Before, I had such a sense of joy and such a sense of being loved, but God was asking me to help him do his work on earth. And it became my practice to say a prayer before I went into a room, knowing that I had something difficult to do, like be with a child who's dying or a family who had just gotten bad news. And I'd find myself saying, I don't begin to know how to do this, God. Give me the words that will comfort. You know, I'm sure that you've done this too.
I know what you mean.
Many times. And somehow, when I went in the room, the right words came out, the right actions, and so I ceased to worry about it.
Were you yet beginning to realize you had a ministry?
Yes, that's when it started. When God said, "Go ahead, go do it."
But what you were doing as a nurse before that time, although it was humanitarian,
it was exactly the same thing. Only I thought I was doing it.
Ah, okay.
You see?
Okay. You want to say a little more about that?
I was doing the same job. I was very present. Certainly, I was very present to this young man. This young man's mother said that it was interesting because this person never knew that I was an atheist, because they just could see God acting through me. And that was startling to me, but I was very supportive of my patients. I was very loving with them. I tried to help them use whatever their supports were. I tried to get them the extra support that they needed, or to help them utilize in whatever way the people that were around them, or their strengths. I was doing that, and I believe that God uses us even when we're unaware, and even now when I'm much more aware, that God uses me when I can't even begin. And one of my everyday prayers is, God, let me be a vehicle for you today, in whatever way you choose. And I don't have to know about it. Just use me and let me say yes. Because sometimes God asks me to do things that I'd say, oh, do I have to do this?
Yes,
you know?
Sure. Well, Moses didn't like what God had in mind for him to do, you know? He said, can't I just stay here and look after the sheep? It's kind of a nice, quiet life.
Right. So I sense that ministry, I do more, what's the word I want? Defined ministry. I do what most people think is ministry. I'm a Eucharistic minister. I'm a lector. But I don't see that as any more ministry, and maybe not as much ministry. But I know I would say not any more ministry than the rest of my life. I think that God calls us to ministry in our families, in our marriages, as parents, as friends. In what we do for work. I've had people say to me, well, that's easy for you because you work with people and you work with children that may be dying or children that are critically ill. You work with fearful people or people in crisis, but I work with a computer or I work with a typewriter. How do I do ministry? And yet, I see people who do ministry when they're doing these jobs in the way they treat their co-workers, in the way they're present to people, in the way they do their job as honestly and thoroughly as they do, in the way they let people out into traffic as they go down Route 7 and someone's been waiting for 20 minutes.
Flag persons.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
So you see it in a very, very broad
fashion.
sense.
Ministry means service, doesn't it?
And there's humanity and when you, well, to humanity, but you have discovered that when you do it consciously in the name of God as well, it makes a difference.
Well, it makes a difference for me because it gives me a sense of peace. about what I'm doing. And if I get really stressed or very fearful about something that I'm going to do, all I have to do is take a moment and go into prayer and ask for God's help, and I feel that sense of peace about what I'm doing. So it certainly makes the difference.
And it's not just Sheara and her medical staff working to save children's lives. You feel that God is involved as well. Oh,
absolutely. It's I feel it's hard to explain, but I feel very much sometimes like a hollow vessel that God uses. And you know, I have a reputation in our department for being very good at doing procedures, doing them very rapidly, doing them with less pain. And with a few people, they've said to me, "How do you do that?" And I don't tell everyone this, but I always, as I'm doing a spinal tap or a bone marrow, I always say a prayer and ask God to help me. And I don't have the sense at all that I'm particularly good at doing these things, that it's God helping me so that I don't hurt this child any more than I have to.
If you were doing a spinal tap or bone marrow on me, I would be delighted that you were asking God for help.
Me too, if it were on me.
I'm quite familiar with what those procedures are like, and I know they can be painful and certainly...
And very frightening.
Very frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do know, I won't mention his name, but I do know of a physician who would I think it was, he would say the portion of the Hail Mary before he would do some difficult procedures.
That's great.
And it was interesting, and he found that things went better when he did that.
Yeah.
Very few people know that, but
yeah. Well, I don't think very many people know that that I do that before procedures either, but it really works. And I always am mindful that it's God working and not me.
Now, looking at priesthood, then, how going back to your days when you were a child, and you saw the priest as being the minister. How do you look at a priest today in terms of ministry, vis-a-vis lay ministry, your kind of ministry?
I'm going to quote someone who we were just talking about this last week, actually, and one of the priests that I am good friends with said that he had come to view his ministry as ministering to the laity so they could then go forth and minister. And I thought that was a wonderful description of exactly what they do in so many ways. But I think we're partners in ministry. And we do some of the same things, we do some different things. And I don't think, I would hate to see a time when we didn't have ordained ministers. I think it's very important. I think we're all called in different ways to do God's work.
So you're not seeing it as they're a real minister vis-a-vis, what is a lay minister?
No, that's not the way I see it.
I didn't think so, but I wanted to underline that for our viewers, that because sometimes people don't.
That's not to put down ordained ministers in any way. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. For those of our viewers who are not in the Christian context, when a Christian is baptized, at least I'm an Episcopalian in our tradition, and also in Roman Catholic tradition, you or your godparents and parents who are standing in for you, if you're an infant, there's a promise to to really to be a minister. It's not, the word minister isn't there, but the work of the minister is stated in every baptism,
yes.
so that you don't wait to be ordained a priest before you're made a minister. When you become a Christian at baptism, you become a minister.
God's priestly people.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. There are many different terms for this approach to ministry. Sometimes it's called mutual ministry. That's mm-hmm. the in word I understand these mm-hmm. days. But it's a ministry we all share with the ordained ministry. And
well, when you think about the way I used to think about ministry as being just for the ordained, what a lot of burden to put on single individuals. How could they possibly be everywhere?
Yeah, they can't. It's impossible.
They have a hard enough job to do with the ministry that they do, and it's a very difficult job. But to be everywhere, to be there and in the world, and at the bedside, and mm-hmm. At the birth and at the death, and how could any human being do that? And it makes sense that God would ask us all to do His work.
Yeah, I remember having been a chaplain in hospitals all my life. Remember, it's some years ago at the Fletcher Allen. I was talking with a Roman Catholic priest. We had a patient in common, and I went to the funeral and then the internment with a priest. He was officiating because the patient was Roman Catholic. And afterwards, I said to him privately, I said, really, the real work is just beginning, because there's going to be a lot of grief that needs to be dealt with mm-hmm. in this family, especially in this family. How do you manage it? And he said, Lee, I can't. He said, I know you're right. I know they need a lot of work. I'm out straight. Mm-hmm. And I think he had, I don't know, up to like 1,000 people mm-hmm. in his mm-hmm. parish. I mean, and that's where lay people come
that's
in.
That's right.
There's no lack of skills, talents, abilities on the part of lay people. And I know, like in your ministry at the hospital, you have a grieving group to help.
Yes, I do.
To help people deal with their grief. In other words, you don't just put IVs in people or deal with solutions and medications mm-hmm. and diagnoses, but you also help people with their feelings.
That's right. I have a bereavement group that meets once a month within Fletcher Allen, and it's composed of parents of mm-hmm. children who have died within my practice. And I also follow people informally. Grieving groups are not for everybody. Not everyone does a group well. So when I have a child die, I continue contact with the family for at least a year. Mm-hmm. I contact the family on specific dates during the year, the child's birthday, the date the child...
Anniversary dates.
Right. The anniversary dates, the date the child was diagnosed, the date the child died. I contact them on special childhood days, like before Christmas, before Thanksgiving, before Halloween, before kids go back to school. These are terrible times for parents who have lost a child. Or if I know of special things, I had one patient who really loved the 4th of July. I knew that was going to be a hard time for those parents or that family. And we talk about things like, what will you do this Christmas? Mm-hmm. How will it be the same? How will it be different? Is there some way that you would like to especially remember this child, or do you need to change your routine? It's different for different people, and you have to, much of my ministry is just trying to listen really well mm-hmm. to mm-hmm. What is special about those people. I also contact people by phone, and this is all done by phone, on special times during the year that I think that they may be having more trouble than others, such as right around the 3 to 4 month period. That's a hard time for parents and families. And they continue to have both my work and home numbers, so they know they can reach me if they get into trouble. If they're in major trouble, I would refer. I've only had to do that once. And generally, people do grieving the way they do living in the same unique fashion. You know that. And you need to support them in their unique style. It takes a very long time. It's not quickly over. It doesn't just take a year. And I will continue to keep in touch with people longer than that.
We would call that in theological language, you have a pastoral ministry.
Yes. Yeah.
Over and above your technological ministry.
Yeah.
You have a pastoral ministry. And that's great. I have a dear friend, a gynecologist and obstetrician, who in his practice, particularly in a large teaching hospital in New York City, he would routinely, when he would sit down with his OBGYN patients, he would sit down at their bedside and he would take their pulse. And
Very touching.
By touching, and there was a young resident who said to him later, "Why are you doing that? It's all in the chart, for goodness sakes." You know, and he said, "Because I want to establish contact with this person, and by taking their pulse and sitting down next to them, I'm one person with another." I mean, ultimately, although the residents are doing most of the work, as a teaching physician, I'm in charge of what's going to happen to this woman, and she needs to have some sense of my presence, my care, my nurture, and I can do that just by taking her pulse.
People need to be touched. People need someone to not be hurried when they come into your room, and to sit down with them, to let them know that you're there for them and not just thinking about the next thing that you're doing.
Yeah, that's so. I guess as we're talking here, I guess I'm saying that even doing a procedure can be a pastoral act.
Absolutely.
If you do it that way, taking a blood pressure, all kinds of things, or palpating a person's body.
You use whatever opportunities you have, don't you? And sometimes I do it even. I always, when I do an intake history, that's a strange word, isn't it? I sometimes use language that I hadn't thought through. But when I initially meet someone, I try to find out more about them as a family, more about the child, what they're like personality-wise, what their strengths are. And I always ask, do you belong to a particular religion? Is that a source of strength for you? Is that something you lean on? So that I know where they're coming from, and I can help them utilize it along with all the other things I learn.
Yeah. So your ministry is many faceted.
It is.
But it also goes on. You were saying before our cameras were turned on, you were saying that you have a ministry in addition outside of the hospital and your work as a nurse practitioner in other ways. Do you want to talk about those kinds of ways, and because some of them may be more typical of what our viewers have as opportunities in their own life?
Well, I have the more acknowledged ministries of Eucharistic minister and lector within my church, but I see ministry very broadly.
That's what I want to hear from you. Something about that.
I see ministry as taking place wherever I am in my daily life. So that means that I'm in ministry, that I may be doing God's work as a wife, as a mother, as a friend, certainly, as a teacher, or that person going down Route 7 that lets someone in.
Yes, that's very appreciated.
But don't you know how you feel when someone does that for you?
Yes, you do.
You know, that's just,
you do.
God asks us to love God and love each other, and that's loving each other. In the way that I treat waiters that wait on me, or salespeople. The way I live my life in general, but it's not. That sounds like it's something that I'm doing, and in a sense I am, because I'm saying yes. But it's still much more of a sense of being a vehicle, of being aware that at this moment God may be asking me to do such and such, and doing it, saying okay. Sometimes to the very mundane of when I see a piece of paper in the corridor, instead of just because I'm busy and I'm running by it, picking it up because someone might slip, and I think of that as very tiny ways that I'm in ministry. So I may have a broader view of ministry than most people do.
I like your view of ministry. I think it's accurate. I mean, I was thinking of the Good Samaritan parable, but of course that is a form of nursing and care. But I'm sure there are many in the Old Testament and New Testament that are similar.
Well, the road to Emmaus, when they invited him for dinner.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
That's just
yes.
the ministry of hospitality.
Yes.
I have a good friend whose family provides me with views of ministry all the time. But there's this wonderful story about at Thanksgiving, they always set an extra plate for someone who might be unexpected, for the unexpected visitor. And one day before Thanksgiving meal, there was a knock on the door, and there was a man there, and he was clutching his pants. They were very large for him, and he didn't have a belt. And he said that he was homeless and he was hungry, and this man sort of sparkled and thought, here's my uninvited guest. And he invited him in, and he realized that he was clutching his pants, and he had daughters everywhere, and there was a man he really didn't know who was clutching his pants, and he said, you need a belt, and started to take off his belt and give it to him. And his wife said, no, not that belt. It was a belt that someone very dear to them had just given him. And she ran and got another belt. But indeed, they gave him a belt. They fed him. They gave him a bus ticket. And who would have known that day? I mean, if you wake up in the morning and say, well, what ministry am I going to do today? Let's plan this. Who would know when you're going to get that knock at the door that defines what God is asking you to do at that moment?
Was the man comfortable with the generosity? I
think he was, from what I hear. He was grateful and went about his way. Got a bus ticket.
When I was, years ago, I was a Boy Scout, and you're supposed to do a good deed every day. There's something that annoys me about doing good deeds every day. Could you, I don't know if you feel that way, and how is, what is something, why, it's silly for me to ask you that, but why am I annoyed at doing a good deed every day, whereas I applaud what happened here in your story?
Yeah. I think it's the sense of planning. Now I'm going to go do a good deed, and I'm going to do a good deed, rather than saying yes in response to what God asked you to do, and recognizing that you're a vehicle. That's what I would guess. I can tell stories of myself. I remember I had an experience of doing what I thought was going to be a good deed, and I did a lot of meditating on this after. I was running for the bus at work, and I missed it. And I thought, oh darn, you know, I'm always in such a hurry. And I was running for a bus, and I saw a woman who was a housekeeper. And I recognized her, and I thought, oh, I can do a good deed. I can sit and talk with this housekeeper, not realizing how arrogant that really was. And so I sat there, and she knew my name, and I didn't know hers.
Yeah, that's embarrassing.
Well, it wasn't only embarrassing, but it was very telling as it went along. She knew my name. And not only did she know my name, but she knew quite a lot about me. I knew she was a housekeeper, and I was doing a good deed. And she said, you know, I remember when your mother was so sick.
Oh, my.
She said, I remember what a wonderful, and my mother had died like 10 years before. She said, I used to go in and talk with your mother. And she knew my mother's name, and she said, you know, talked about how my mother would talk about me. And then she told me that her mother was very ill right now. And when my bus finally came, I said goodbye, still not knowing her name, which I made sure I found out the next day. And as I thought about it, I was so embarrassed. And I was so chagrined at my arrogance. And here I was seeing God. I mean, that was an encounter with God for me. Through her, I mean, that was God saying, I don't think you're so good. Don't think, you know, you weren't acting as a vehicle there. You were doing a good deed. And
yeah, that's a good example. I think a very good example. Yeah, and it backfired to the actual example.
Exactly.
Yeah. Knowing you personally, I know you also volunteer in a camp in the summertime. In your work in the camp, is that mostly as a nurse, or is it in terms of keeping the routines going and the children not breaking the building, or
well, I'm the medical director for the camp, and I oversee their medications, chemotherapy, any accidents they have. I have a nursing staff that's wonderful, but more than that, that's one of my larger experiences of God during the year. What happens at camp is just the epitome of people loving very well. I do a memorial service for children who have died at camp, and that's a beautiful service with the help of very good friends that are very talented. The beauty of camp, and the reason I see God there so well, is that people quickly lose their walls. It's one of the joys of my job in general, because people in crisis lose their walls very quickly. So instead of walking down the corridor and having someone say to you, how are you? You know, and the other person saying fine, even though they may be in the middle of a divorce or someone just died, or you don't do that in these situations. In a camp, within hours, and certainly within the first day, people lose their walls. They're very vulnerable. They're very out there.
Why is that so?
It's one of the things God does. I don't know. It happens to adults and children alike. I've had adults who have real trouble. You know, they're going to go there and they're going to do a good deed. Here we go with good deeds again. And they find themselves changed. Forever changed. I have people on there are people on this staff that they take their own vacation. They're not paid. They buy their own plane tickets from Washington and Florida and North Carolina and California.
Really? They come from that distance?
To volunteer, because it's such a beautiful experience and I would say of God's presence. They may say you can define it any way you want. It's sort of like when I was an atheist, was God working through me, or it's like it's just a matter of what you call it. If you don't call a tree, would it still not give shade? Kind of sense. And so people are extraordinarily vulnerable at camp. camp, and very loving and very caring of each other. And I've had multiple experiences of people going above and beyond for each other, and including the youngest children, of loving extraordinarily well. It's a wonderful experience. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
I heard about the camp from someone in the Boston area.
Oh, really?
I mentioned your name to them. Somehow it didn't ring a bell. But I can't remember who it was that I spoke with.
Was it recently?
Yeah, well, I talked with them, about within the last month.
Because we were on national TV. And they wouldn't have recognized my name because I wasn't named on it. But
okay.
we were on Inside America.
Oh, okay.
So many people called around the country.
Is this a unique camp?
There are other camps for children with cancer throughout the United States. Some of them very good, some of them kind of like a usual camp. Our camp is extraordinarily creative. We have amazing staff.
I'm going to say something. I'm not saying it to embarrass you, but because somehow I think the Holy Spirit has led me to say it. There are conversations in the Episcopal Church as well as in the Roman Catholic Church and maybe the Orthodox churches that the priest at the altar must be male, because if they're supposed to be, the individual is supposed to be an icon of Christ, and Christ was male. As I listen to you, Sheara, I think you are an icon of Christ, and you're not male at all.
I'm not male. Thank you very much. That's about the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
Well, I really feel that. I really feel that.
Thank you.
And it has nothing to do with what is done at the altar. It has to do with, if you see an icon of Christ, you see an icon of Christ, and it's not necessarily tied up with
gender
or a certain function.
I would agree with that, and I think that we will see changes in that thinking over the years. I think it will probably be slow, and maybe slow change is good change and less disruptive. I don't know, but that doesn't stop someone from doing God's work because they're female. It doesn't stop you from being one of God's priestly people. I think it's just societal, and it was societal.
Sure.
If you think about it in the time of Jesus, and that's my belief. It isn't something that makes me extraordinarily angry, because I have such a sense that the Spirit is moving, and in God's own time, things happen, and I absolutely trust how God does things and the timing that God uses. So while I have certainly listened while other women within my church have experienced pain around this issue and can understand their pain, it's not my own personal issue.
Well, I'm glad that it doesn't give you a personal unrest. I mean, if suddenly your church would permit women to be ordained, I would personally think, at least for Sheara Billado, that would be a terrible waste.
Well, I don't feel called to the ordained ministry.
No, well, your ministry is rich and full and valuable and blessed, and I mean, God is active in it, and what more can anyone ask?
And that's not to say that in 10 years God might not say it's time for you to be ordained. Well, I don't know, but I trust.
The future we never know about.
Right.
Speaking of the future, it's time now for people to phone in. If you would like to phone in and speak with me or speak with Sheara Billado, our guest, about our subject of ministry and lay ministry, priestly ministry, if you wish. we welcome your calls. We really enjoy them. We like feedback. We like a dialogue. And we have a speakerphone here, so once we're connected by calling the number on the screen, you can just join us and we can be a threesome here. So please call. We have 15 minutes available for you to phone in and to join us here at Channel 15. So please give us a call. We'll continue to talk, but the minute we have a clear signal that you are on the line, we will stop our conversation and talk with you. So please call. Have you had any of your associates or friends or family share with you their own kind of ministry, conceptually about what they're about, or have noticed something about you, what you're about, or is this all pretty private?
That's a good question. Certainly many people that I'm good friends with have their own ministries and recognize my ministry. And I share that. I'm in a prayer group. We share how God is present to us during the week, or what God is asking us, or what we think God is asking us to do at the moment. We share that. I don't go into a patient's room and say, "Hi, I'm Sheara Billado, and I'm a minister from God." Like, what is that? Touched by an angel.
Yes,
I'm an angel. Yes. I don't do that. I trust that God's going to work in whatever way He's going to work, and that I'm there in a whole variety of commitments. There have been some people that were threatened that knew me forever as an atheist, and suddenly, what is this? I remember the first time I had this conversion experience shortly before Christmas, and on Christmas morning, I said to my young family, after all the presents were open, I went up and got dressed, and I thought, now how do I do this? And I said to them, I'm going to church. And they said, yeah, sure you are.
Yeah, big joke.
And where are you really going? And I said, I'm going to church. And I wasn't sure enough. It took me quite a long time to understand what had happened to me. So I couldn't quite explain it to anyone else yet. But I knew I wanted to go to church. And so I went off to church. And at first it was sort of like, well, with the people that felt this real change in me, oh, this is something, she'll get over it. And I just was very quiet, and if people asked me questions, I would answer to the best of my knowledge, because I didn't have a clue what had happened to me. I just knew it had happened. And but mostly I didn't try to, I certainly didn't try to suddenly push my family into coming to church with me. I didn't try to say, some people thought that I thought I was, quote, better than thou, now that I was going to church. And I said, no, it's nothing like that at all. I'm not better than I was when I was an atheist. I'm just lucky. I feel privileged to know how much God loves me, kind of feeling. But, I wish everyone in the world did, because there's such joy involved in it. It isn't so much that I would have everyone in the world know God as I would, because they'd be necessarily better people, but more that they'd be joyful people, that they'd know how much they're loved. And it's such an unconditional experience that I would have that for everyone.
I like the way you describe that situation there. Yeah. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, yeah.
A related question is, I think I know your answer, but how do you witness to your faith with a child in that context, or in another context? Doesn't have to be at work. When do you let people know who you are, who your Lord is, and when do you let your deeds and your actions suffice?
It's interesting that before my conversion, no children ever talked to me about God. That's an absolute.
Really?
And I find that fascinating. I must have been putting up huge walls.
So that's you said no children talked with you
Adults
about
sometimes
God. It wasn't
did.
that you didn't talk with them about
Exactly.
God, but the children hadn't initiated it with you.
That's right. And that's exactly what happens, both with adults and with children. Certainly adults had talked to me about their faith, and I had supported them in whatever their faith was. And because I was born into a church, and because I was interested enough in reading, I had a wide knowledge of people's faith so that I could do that. But it wasn't until after my conversion that children started telling me about their experience of God. And it just kept happening and happening and happening.
What kind of things would they say?
They just, wow. They would talk about talking to God, and that was their prayer, but they would talk to God, and I had one little girl who was far from home and her family was unable to visit, and she would say that when she got really scared at night, she would talk to God, and God would tell her that she was okay and that he was right there, and that she could go to sleep, and then she would go to sleep.
How old was she?
This girl was 9. I had one little girl tell me that that God was that God loved everybody. That God loved everybody, and that God sort of watched you like Santa Claus does. She was a 4-year-old. And that saw when you were good and when you were bad, but God forgave you, and that's why she said, even if you were bad, sometimes you got presents anyway at Christmas. So she sort of got them all wound up together. I had one little girl write a letter to God saying, God, she had leukemia, and talking about how difficult it was for her to have leukemia because special things happened to her, and it made her special, and it made her brothers feel badly. And
they were left out.
They were left out, and please, God, please get rid of my leukemia. I had one little girl, the same 9-year-old. I was lying in bed reading a story with her, and she, it was the Narnia series, and I was reading it to her, and she stopped me and she said, you know, I think that's just what heaven is like, don't you? And we had this conversation about what heaven was like. I had a little girl say to me, do you know what happens when people die, Sheara? And she patted the bed, and it wasn't like, would you like to sit down? It was sit, you know. And so I sat, and I said, well, what? And she said, when people die, they go to funeral homes, and people there curl their hair and put makeup on them and close their eyes so they look as though they're just asleep. Isn't that silly? and then she said to me, what do you think happens when people die? And just then someone walked in and interrupted us, and she went off to a test, and we didn't get to finish that conversation.
How old was she?
She was 7. Really? I've had many conversations with children who were dying that could talk to me. Do we have a call?
I think so.
No? 5 minutes. They would talk to me and ask me, you know, what did I think? Did I think this? Did I think that? I never, with adults or children, impose it on them. I had a young man who I said, and I will ask people, what's your sense of life after death? What do you believe? And I had a young man who went from believing that maybe, at best, we became vapor, like steam, and changed in that way, to, at his death, talking about the presence that was with him all the time. And following it around the room, as I would have said at his deathbed, he was 23, and saying, "Isn't it beautiful?" And I said to him, "What do you call that presence?" And he said, "I don't know." And I would just leave it there. I had never imposed my own belief system on anyone else.
So often churches across the board, I mean, in my experience anyway, when they talk about Christian education for children, they're trying to tell children, you know, all kinds of stuff about stoles or church history or theology or what the Bible says, but they don't listen to what the children have to say about their own relationship with God, as though the children weren't aware of the presence of God, and that's sad.
The one, I know we just have a couple of minutes, but a dear story that I love happened to a friend of mine and her daughter, and a deeply religious family. God is very much part of their everyday life, and this little girl was just 7 years old, and she woke up with a nightmare, and she was very frightened. Her mother went in and took her in her arms and cuddled her and talked to her, and when she calmed down, started to put her back to sleep, and she said, "No, Mommy, don't leave." And she says, "But you know that God is with you right here, and that your guardian angel is here, and that you don't ever have to be scared." And she said, "But sometimes I just need somebody with skin on."
I love it.
Isn't that wonderful? Kids say things beautifully and wonderfully, and it's...
I love it. That's very profound.
Isn't that wonderful?
Very, very profound.
So I guess that's how I see myself sometimes doing God's ministry, as somebody with skin on.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Sheara, it's been delightful to have you here. There are a lot of very profound things you've had to say, as I thought that might happen. Perhaps we've had no phone calls because people are so rapt at listening to you that they're not phoning in.
Well, I hope that people will spend some time thinking about what their ministry is in the world, and really spending some time talking to God about it, because it'll broaden.
And I know you believe this way, because I know you, but that God will also answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's not just something that you read about in the Hebrew scriptures or in the Christian scriptures, but God will really answer.
Yeah. Doesn't always say what I think he's going to.
No.
But he always answers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, in the Christian scriptures, Jesus says that he'll have no part of us unless we all become as small
little children.
I think that's very profound. Very profound. We can't know God in any other way.
That's right.
So, well, I'm grateful for your ministry. I know many other people are as well, Sheara.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
If some of you haven't decided to phone in, you can still write us a letter, care of the studio, and we'll be glad to answer it. So that's an option for you. So we look forward to your tuning in Channel 15 next week, and joining us with our next part about personal ministry.